The boy stood quietly at the polished marble counter of the largest bank in the city. His clothes were dusty, his hands were rough, and the small sack he carried looked like something pulled from a garbage pile. People in the bright lobby slowly began to stare. Some whispered, some laughed softly, because they all knew the boy from the streets outside. They had seen him walking through alleys every morning with a cart made from broken wheels, collecting plastic bottles and metal scraps, the same boy everyone called the trash collector, and yet now he was standing inside a place filled with expensive suits and golden lights. The young bank clerk behind the counter looked at him with confusion and a little irritation. She leaned forward and said quietly, "This bank is not a shelter. You cannot stay here." The boy did not move. He simply placed the dirty sack onto the counter and looked down. His voice was calm and very soft. "I came to deposit money," he said. The clerk blinked and then laughed in disbelief. A few customers nearby turned their heads. One businessman smirked and crossed his arms as if this was the most amusing thing he had seen all morning. The clerk shook her head and pushed the sack slightly back toward him. "Listen, kid, we don't have time for jokes," she said. But the boy gently opened the sack, and dozens of bundles wrapped in plastic slowly spilled across the polished counter. Stacks of cash, real cash, thick and worn but clearly real. The clerk froze for a moment. The people nearby leaned closer. Someone gasped quietly. The boy stood silently as if this moment did not surprise him at all. The clerk's smile slowly disappeared. She picked up one bundle and flipped through the bills quickly. Her fingers began to tremble slightly, because the money was real, completely real, and there was far more than anyone expected. The bank manager noticed the small crowd forming and walked over with confident steps. He was a tall man with expensive glasses and the kind of smile that usually appeared only when wealthy clients arrived. But when he saw the boy, his expression changed immediately. "What is going on here?" he asked sharply. The clerk whispered something quickly, pointing at the piles of money. The manager frowned and looked at the boy from head to toe, clearly annoyed. "Where did you steal this?" he said coldly. The boy slowly raised his eyes for the first time. They were calm but tired. "I did not steal anything," he replied quietly. The manager gave a short laugh filled with arrogance. "Of course you didn't," he said sarcastically. "Children who collect garbage usually carry hundreds of thousands of dollars in bags." The people in the lobby chuckled again. The boy said nothing. He simply stood there and waited, because he had learned a long time ago that arguing with powerful people only made things worse. The manager crossed his arms and looked toward the security guard. "Call the police," he said firmly. "We will find out where this came from." The boy lowered his gaze again and nodded slowly, as if he had expected those exact words. The minutes passed slowly. The bank lobby grew quieter. People continued to stare at the strange scene. A poor street boy standing beside piles of cash while powerful adults discussed his fate like he was not even there. But inside the boy something else existed, something small but steady. A quiet hope he had carried for many years. A hope that one day the truth would finally be seen. The police arrived quickly. 2 officers stepped inside and looked at the unusual situation with suspicion. The manager greeted them with confident authority and explained that a street child had brought a suspicious amount of cash into the bank. One officer turned to the boy and asked calmly, "What is your name?" The boy answered softly, "Daniel." The officer nodded and then looked at the money on the counter. "Daniel, do you understand why this looks strange?" he asked. Daniel nodded again. "Yes," he said quietly. The second officer opened a notebook and continued asking questions. Where did the money come from? How long had he had it? Who gave it to him? The boy answered every question patiently but simply. "It belongs to me," he repeated. The manager shook his head and sighed loudly as if the entire situation was wasting his valuable time. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "That boy probably found it in a trash pile somewhere." Some people in the lobby laughed again, but the police officer remained serious. He turned back to Daniel and said gently, "If it belongs to you, can you prove it?" Daniel slowly reached into the pocket of his worn shirt and pulled out a folded envelope. It looked old and fragile. The edges were yellowed with time. He placed it carefully on the counter. "This explains everything," he said quietly. The officer opened the envelope and unfolded a letter inside. The room became very still as he began reading silently. His eyebrows slowly lifted in surprise. The second officer leaned closer. The manager impatiently asked, "Well, The officer looked up slowly and said, "This letter is from a law firm." The crowd grew even quieter. The officer continued reading, explaining that many years ago a wealthy businessman named Victor Hale had created a hidden trust fund worth $100 million. The funds were to be given to a specific child when he reached the age of 18, a child whose identity was protected for safety reasons. The officer looked directly at Daniel. "According to this document, that child is you." The entire lobby seemed to freeze. The manager's confident expression vanished instantly. The clerk covered her mouth in shock. Whispers filled the air like wind moving through dry leaves. Daniel remained calm, but inside his chest his heart was beating faster than ever before. The officer continued reading the letter, explaining that Victor Hale had once saved a small boy from an accident many years ago, and before he died he created the trust so that the boy would one day have a chance at a better life. The only condition was that the boy must come to the bank himself with the letter when he was old enough. The manager's face had turned pale now, because he suddenly realized that the quiet child everyone mocked was legally the owner of a fortune larger than most companies in the city. The officer slowly folded the letter and handed it back to Daniel with respect. The arrogant laughter that once filled the lobby had completely disappeared. The manager cleared his throat nervously and forced a new smile onto his face, but it looked very different now. "Mr. Daniel," he said carefully, "perhaps we should move this conversation to a private office." The boy looked at him quietly for a moment. The same man who had just accused him of theft was now speaking with forced politeness. Daniel nodded slowly, not with anger, not with pride, simply with calm patience, because life had taught him that dignity was stronger than revenge. The people in the lobby watched silently as the boy who once pushed a cart of garbage through the streets walked beside the bank manager toward the private offices, the same boy they had laughed at only minutes earlier. And as the doors closed behind him, many of them realized something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives, that sometimes the quietest person in the room carries a story far greater than anyone can imagine, and sometimes the boy everyone calls a trash collector is actually the owner of $100 million.